please." The mother's voice cracked as she gripped the sleeve of the first nurse she saw. "She can't breathe." The girl's body was already trembling on the gurney, her small hands clenching the sides like she was holding on to the earth itself. Her chest rose in short, desperate bursts, eyes glassy but aware. She didn't speak. Couldn't. But her gaze said everything. "Help me." The automatic doors slammed open. A second nurse came running, barking codes into a headset. They wheeled the girl in fast, hooked up monitors, checked vitals. Too low. Too unstable. The attending physician called for cardiology, paging quickly, flipping through her intake sheet. Down the hallway, the lead surgeon walked in. Tall, white coat crisp. Confidence clinging to him like cologne. He barely looked up from his tablet as the attending flagged him down. "We've got a situation," she said. "Severe shortness of breath, tachycardia, irregular." He glanced over, saw the girl, saw the mother. Something flickered in his eyes, then nothing. "What's the file say?" he asked. "We're running diagnostics now," the nurse replied. "She needs someone in the OR if it gets worse." He stared a second longer, then scoffed. "Get someone else," he said, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. "I'm not wasting my OR time on that girl." The words dropped heavy into the room. Sharp, loud, final. The nurse's lips tightened. She didn't argue, not openly, but her eyes lingered too long on the monitor. The attending looked away, jaw locked. The mother stepped forward, voice rising. "Excuse me?" she said. "She's my daughter. You don't get to talk about her like that." The surgeon didn't turn, didn't repeat himself. He was already walking away, typing something back into his tablet, footsteps echoing down the corridor as if nothing had happened. The girl lay still. The machines beeped steadily. Her mother stood beside her, one hand clutching her daughter's arm, the other pressed flat against her own chest, as if to keep something from breaking through. They didn't cry, not yet. A younger nurse approached quietly and adjusted the IV line. Her hand brushed the girl's shoulder. "We're still with you," she whispered. Nobody knew what the chart held. Not yet. They didn't know the research flagged in her profile. They didn't know the trial she was eligible for. They didn't know what her DNA might unlock. They didn't know that the girl gasping for air was the key to something the doctor had been chasing his entire career. He thought he was walking away from a waste of time, but he had just walked away from the case that could change everything. And soon he'd realize it. Too late to take back what he said, but just in time to expose who he really was. The machine beat beside her, steady but sharp, a digital reminder that her breath was still trapped somewhere between her lungs and her willpower. The oxygen mask fogged with each shallow exhale, her fingers trembling slightly on the edge of the hospital blanket. Nurses moved quietly around her, speaking in clipped phrases. She could hear everything. She always could. No one in the room knew who she was. Not really. They knew her name, her age, her vitals, but not the girl behind the chart. Not the girl who memorized the periodic table at 9, who built her first anatomy model from cardboard and glue because her school didn't have one. Not the girl who asked for medical textbooks for Christmas and had dog-eared pages on neurology by the time she hit middle school. None of them saw that. They didn't see the afternoons she spent volunteering at the free clinic down the street from her apartment complex, filing patient forms, listening to nurses explain intake procedures, shadowing anyone who would let her be quiet and close. She never interrupted. She just watched, learned, took notes in the margins of her notebooks when no one was looking. They didn't see the notebooks themselves. 3 of them packed with sketches of the brain, lists of drug interactions, medical terms she didn't yet understand but repeated to herself like poems. They were taped together with care, pages worn at the edges, not school assignments. Just her own curriculum. They didn't know that she had helped her grandmother through the final months of her life, that she researched every medication before handing it over, that she stayed up late reading hospice care articles and asked doctors more questions than some of their own interns, that she never cried in front of her grandmother, only after, in the quiet of the laundry room, clutching towels she hadn't yet folded. They didn't know that she had tested herself before anyone else did, monitored symptoms, cross-referenced articles, learned to understand the language of illness because she knew one day it would matter. And now, it did. But none of that lived on the surface. They didn't see a prodigy. They saw a patient, a girl in a hoodie, a black girl, young, tired, breathing too shallow, eyes too wide. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't weak. She was simply sick. And for the first time in her life, knowledge couldn't fix what her body was failing to do. She blinked slowly. Not out of exhaustion, but out of restraint. Her mother sat at the corner of the room, pacing the same 2 feet over and over. No one had returned with updates. No one had said her name with urgency. Not yet. They didn't know she had planned to be a doctor, that her dream was to stand in this very room one day, not as a patient, but as the one saving the life. And that's why the sting cut deeper than the pain. Not just because they were slow, but because they looked at her and saw nothing but need. Not brilliance, not ambition, just a girl they didn't bother to ask about. The file landed with a soft thud on the corner of his desk, nestled between his untouched espresso and a stack of grant proposals. He didn't look up right away. His fingers were still moving across his tablet, reading an article that didn't matter, skimming through headlines that would never mention anyone in the next room. Urgent labs just came in, the nurse said, her voice clipped but steady. They flagged something, thought you'd want to see. He nodded without interest, offering nothing more than a distracted hum. The folder remained untouched as the nurse stepped out. His mind was already somewhere else, halfway into the next scheduled procedure, mentally calculating how many hours he had left to review his conference slides. He didn't know the girl's name. He didn't care until he saw the highlight. He had flipped the chart open only because it was interrupting the edge of his workspace. A half glance, a second of obligation. But the bright yellow mark on page 3 caught his eye. His hand stilled. Rare genetic marker identified, full compatibility with candidate group in NeuroX17 study. He blinked. Read it again. The letters didn't change. He sat up straighter, all the disinterest draining from his face like water off glass. His eyes scanned the rest of the page now with urgency. Age, medical history, the pattern of symptoms. It was her. The girl from earlier. The one he had refused to take into the OR. The one he dismissed with a single wave of his hand. The air in the room shifted. He grabbed the rest of the pages, flipping quickly. Notes from the pediatrician, imaging reports, blood work. And then the key line, patient is a confirmed anomaly within the NeuroX17 control group. Her biology aligned perfectly with the projected test variables. She wasn't just eligible. She was rare. The kind of rare that got a researcher noticed. The kind of rare that opened doors. He had heard whispers about the NeuroX program, knew how selective the case studies were. He had been circling the trial's advisory board for over a year, trying to position himself as a prime candidate. But to be taken seriously, he needed something no one else had. Now she was lying 5 rooms away, breathing through a mask, and he had almost thrown her away. He stood up fast. The chair scraped behind him, forgotten. He was already calling down to prep. He needed the OR cleaned, his team assembled. He used words like stat and priority. He moved fast, because now finally the patient mattered. He walked into the hallway with a new tone in his voice, confident, warm, rehearsed. The smile he wore now wasn't cold, it was professional, the kind that wins awards. No one mentioned the way he had acted earlier. The nurses said nothing. The mother didn't trust him, but she didn't stop him either. The machines beeped in rhythm. He leaned over the girl, all kindness now, and said her name for the first time. Not because he respected her, because now she had something he wanted. The door swung open like a scene rehearsed in his head. His coat was fresh, his gloves already on, and the smile on his face had the polish of someone who knew which cameras might be watching. He entered the room with calm authority, eyes immediately scanning the monitors before landing on the girl. Her mother stood up fast, instinct in her posture, questions already forming in her mouth. He cut her off with a raised hand and a practiced tone. "There's been a delay," he said. "Paperwork, insurance, a mix-up with the file, but we're clear now. I'll be taking the case." Her mother didn't speak. Not because she believed him, but because something in her still hoped this meant the nightmare was ending. The girl lay still, her eyes open now, slower but watching. He turned to her and softened his tone. "You're in good hands," he said, like a line pulled from a brochure. He never mentioned the earlier refusal, never acknowledged the look he gave when he waved her off. He spoke as if he had been her surgeon all along, as if they were lucky to have him. The staff said nothing. The nurse in the corner clenched her jaw. The attending who handed him the updated scans didn't make eye contact, but the room fell into motion. The machines beeped, and everyone obeyed. He led the surgical prep like a symphony, checked every detail with an efficiency that felt like performance. He wasn't nervous, this was what he was good at. And now that the stakes were high, now that this wasn't just a patient, but a path to prestige, he was fully present. In the operating room, he moved with exactness. The team followed in silence. No one questioned his confidence. No one questioned his sudden change of heart. They didn't need to. They knew this wasn't about her. It was about him. The surgery took less time than expected. No complications, no surprises. Her vitals stabilized quickly. The moment her heart rate steadied, he exhaled through his nose and glanced at the monitor with a nod that almost looked like pride. He stepped out of the OR 30 minutes later and walked down the corridor like he had just completed a masterpiece. The press release was already forming in his mind. A rare genetic match. A breakthrough procedure. A young life saved. He could already see the headline at the next medical symposium. He could already feel the room when he said her name and claimed the credit. He found her mother in the waiting room and delivered the news with the same cool tone. She's stable. The surgery went well. She'll recover fully. The mother's shoulders dropped. Not in relief, but in something closer to disbelief. Gratitude tried to surface, but it got stuck. Something about his face. Something about how proud he looked. She said thank you anyway. Not for him. For her daughter. He nodded and turned away, already composing the speech. Already imagining the applause. The girl slept peacefully in recovery, unaware of the version of the story he was preparing to tell. The first message wasn't loud. Just a private group chat shared between a few nurses, one of whom couldn't sleep after her shift. She typed the words slowly, hands trembling over her phone. He refused her. I was there. He looked right at her and walked away. No one responded at first. Then another nurse replied. I saw it too. He didn't even ask her name. They didn't intend to cause a storm. It started as something between exhausted professionals who couldn't forget the look on a mother's face. But truth has a way of seeping through even the thickest walls. And hospitals, for all their white lights and silent rules, are still filled with people who notice. The story made its way to a resident who had been in the hallway that day, a young med student with a sister close to the girl's age. He had watched the doctor shrug, had heard the way he said, that girl, like she wasn't a person but a category. He hadn't spoken up in the moment, but now the words clung to him. So he tweeted, just a few lines. No names. No hospital. Just, surgeon refused to operate on a black teen until he realized her chart could boost his career. Then suddenly she mattered. The post sat quiet for a few hours, then it caught fire. Retweets turned into quote tweets. Threads formed. People began sharing their own stories. Nurses from other hospitals chimed in. Then someone anonymously dropped a clip, a sliver of security footage from the hallway. You couldn't hear what was said, but you could see the doctor look down at the chart, flip the page, then freeze. Moments later, he moved fast, suddenly interested, suddenly engaged. The footage was paired with the tweet. Together, they spread. A hashtag formed. Then a journalist picked it up. A local blog ran it first. Then a national outlet. Doctor ignores black patient until research link discovered. The phrasing softened the truth, but the public read between the lines. At the hospital, the walls tightened. Meetings were called. PR teams scrambled. The doctor issued a statement full of vague sympathy. No apology. Just a polished paragraph about patient privacy and clinical timing. It did not go well. Questions came fast. Emails. Phone calls. Protesters gathered outside the building. The staff whispered behind surgical masks. Some defended him, others couldn't. He tried to contain it. He called favors. He threatened lawsuits. But the footage was already saved. The story already copied, downloaded, screenshotted, translated, immortalized. His name started trending, but not for the right reasons. And meanwhile, the girl was still recovering, still breathing through steady machines, still unaware that her presence had shaken the very building that once acted like she didn't matter. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the portable fan in the corner and the faint scratch of pen on paper. She sat upright in the hospital bed, wrapped in a loose sweater that hung off one shoulder. The machines were still there, though most of them had been silenced, blinking in soft pulses instead of beeping with urgency. Her mother sat nearby, reading without reading, eyes flicking up every few moments to make sure her daughter was still resting easy. The knock on the door was gentle. The woman who stepped inside held a notebook instead of a camera, a quiet smile instead of a press badge. She introduced herself as local press, small-town paper, just a voice hoping to carry the truth where it needed to go. The girl nodded once. She didn't mind the idea of speaking, but she had her own terms. No photos, no last name, no drama, just honesty. The journalist pulled up a chair, set the recorder on the table, but didn't press start right away. She waited, let the air settle, then asked one question. Would you like to tell me what happened? The girl adjusted her sleeves, looked down at her hands, then she spoke. She told the story plainly, the way her chest had tightened that morning, the ride to the hospital, her mother's voice rising in fear, the white coat entering the room, the way his eyes skimmed over her like she was paperwork and not a person, the words he said, not quiet, not whispered, just sharp and clear enough for everyone nearby to pretend they hadn't heard. She spoke of the silence that followed, the clock that ticked too long, the feeling of her breath slipping away and no one rushing in to save it. Then she paused. She described the moment it changed. The way his face looked after reading her file, the sudden concern, the theater of kindness, the way he said her name like it meant something to him now. She said she could tell the difference between care and ambition. She could feel it in the hands that touched her chart and the ones that touched her shoulder. She didn't need to say his name. He had already named himself in his choices. The journalist asked if she wanted to file a complaint. She shook her head. "I want to speak for the next girl," she said, "the one who might not have something in her chart to make her valuable." The recorder blinked silently on the desk. The words hung in the air, weightless and impossible to ignore. Her voice was steady, clear. She didn't rush, didn't cry. She spoke with the calm of someone who had spent a lifetime being overlooked and finally chose to step into the center of the story. The interview lasted less than an hour, but when it was published, it traveled farther than the headlines. Her words were reposted, quoted, read aloud in classrooms and waiting rooms and morning news segments. Not because she accused anyone, but because she didn't have to. The press release was short, measured. Phrases like unfortunate incident and ongoing commitment to equity were carefully arranged in soft, forgettable language. Buried in the middle of the paragraph was the line that mattered most. The doctor had voluntarily stepped down from his role, effective immediately. No press conference, no apology, just a footnote beneath a wave of attention he could no longer control. His office door was closed by the end of the week. His nameplate taken down. His legacy, once built on arrogance and reputation, now marked by a silence no award could cover. He had been the kind of man people defended until they couldn't, the kind who walked into every room like he belonged at the front of it. But not anymore. The headlines moved on. The hospital shifted focus. And the girl he once dismissed kept moving forward. Weeks later, another door opened. This one was wide, welcoming. The kind that carried possibilities instead of pretenses. The girl stepped through it wearing jeans, sneakers, and a quiet fire in her chest. A backpack slung over one shoulder, laptop under one arm, she walked into the university lecture hall without hesitation. Her eyes scanned the room, not for approval, but for purpose. It was a beginning, but not the kind that started with erasure. This time, she was not here to be saved. She was here to learn, to lead, to prepare for the future she had already seen from a hospital bed. Her name was called during roll, and it echoed differently now, with weight, with recognition, not because of headlines, but because of what she had decided to do with them. She took her seat near the front, opened her laptop, took notes with focus and ease. Around her, students chatted, adjusted their notebooks, powered up their devices. Some glanced her way, a few whispered. But she didn't flinch. The professor entered, began the lecture. A slide flashed onto the screen detailing neurological pathways, the very same subject she had once mapped out in a dog-eared notebook late at night in her bedroom. She smiled softly. This was no longer theory. This was her path. She had imagined this moment more times than she could count. Not exactly like this, but close enough. And it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It wasn't about revenge or recognition. It was about building something real. Becoming someone who could look a patient in the eyes and say, "I see you, I believe you, I'm here." Her fingers moved across the keys, her mind locked into the lesson. There was so much to learn, but she wasn't afraid of the challenge. She had already survived something far harder. And now, she was in the room. Not as a case, not as a headline, not as a girl to be overlooked, but as the one who would change the story next.